For a cold gut second, I thought she might be Arlene. The impression lasted only a few seconds. Then I saw it was Tidge Dude Dardier. We'd fought together pretty closely in Kafiristan, and you get so you recognize a buddy from behind, especially females in a crack fighting unit. Her face was unmarked, still cute, still a little girl with red hair who had a big surprise for any man who thought she was easy pickings. I wondered if a monster or zombie had gotten her. The ugly wound was in her stomach. There was something funny about her posture. She lay as if she had a secret. I stared for a moment, coaxing her dead body to talk to me. Then I figured it out. Dudette was lying on top of something, shielding it from dry, zombie eyes. I touched her gently, then gingerly slipped over her corpse. Dude Dardier was lying on top of the pump-action riot gun I'd been wishing for earlier. Her death day present for yours truly. I felt like a ghoul, but feelings were a luxury. With a shotgun in my arsenal, my survival rating took a big leap up the charts. I checked the bore and found no obstructions. There were plenty of shells in the bandolier lying around her body. I thanked Dudette for being a Marine to the end. Semper Fi, Mac. Back in the corridor, I found remains of a map on the wall. The bad guys evidently followed a plan, proven by destroyed radio gear and vandalized maps. But this time, there was just enough left of the map to figure out the basic direction toward the lift, which I prayed was still working. Being properly armed did wonders for my psychology. I decided maybe I would do well to generate a tactical plan. There is no north or south on Phobos, but I oriented myself along the facility's major axis. Getting to the nuclear plant was the next logical move. It had the largest concentration of equipment, and perhaps even an untrained engineer like me could jerry-rig some gear into a working radio. I found the lift without further molestation. Naturally, it was broken, shot to hell. The hydraulics leaked away from numerous gunshot holes, but the manual escape hatch still worked. Placing myself back into a narrow, confined space was about as appealing as it sounded, and my damned imagination started bugging me again at precisely the moment duty called. My imagination was not very patriotic. It needed 6 weeks of boot camp. There was a dim light in the shaft, very, very dim. Every square foot of the base was supposed to be constantly lit, bright as day, except for the barracks. Someone in charge must have been mugged by a flashlight when he was a kid and wanted nothing more to do with them. Maybe I shouldn't have complained. Light was light. As I climbed down the long shaft, it occurred to me to think about something cheerful, a silver lining that must exist somewhere in these storm clouds. There had to be something. And there was. I hadn't found Arlene's body yet, and so long as I didn't know what had happened to her, there was hope. I figured the nuclear plant must be at least 6 stories down. Just keep climbing. That was all I could do. Climb. Hope. Watch out for demons. Real simple. I preferred thinking about Arlene. I remembered the day she showed up from Paris Island and joined the real Corps, the Fighting Corps. I looked up from monkeying with the sticky belt advance on a .60 caliber, auto-stabilized, and I saw a brutal babe in camis, spats, webbing, and sporting a newly shaved high and tight. Catching her eye told me all I had to know. She knew what she was doing all right. The Corps is protective of its haircut, flat on the top and shaved on the sides. We're talking a sign of distinction, a challenge thrown at every other service. God help the Navy, Army, or Space Force puke who shows up on one of our bases in a high and tight. What happens afterward is why God made Captain's mast. But Arlene was no innocent. She wore her cut high and proud, and wore a single red private stripe. Lieutenant Weems, pre-punch, took one look at Arlene Sanders, a long, hard look, and curled his lip. He watched her hand her packet to PFC Dodd, who stared at her like she had two heads. So far as I know, that was the first time they ever met. They who were destined for, well, not love exactly. Extreme lust-like. After about a year of ignoring him with all her might, then another 6 months of despising him, she shamefacedly confessed to me that she'd spent the night in his Fiat. All in all, not the best foot forward on this first day for the first woman in Fox Company. Of course, the opinion of Lieutenant Weems was already a debased currency by this time, but the opinion of the other men mattered, and no one could express that company opinion with more eloquence than Gunnery Sergeant Goforth, the company's grand old man. Hell, he was in his late 30s, an 18-year Marine, the last 10 in light drop. Goforth looked like Aldo Ray in those old John Wayne movies. He was heavy-set, muscular, but not fat. He shaved his head but would probably be bald anyway. Goforth was a Frank's tank with legs, a few freckles mixed in along with the rolled humongous armor. The Gunny made a big deal of sauntering over to Arlene and let loose with his thick Georgian drawl. "Hooey! Where'd the lady get the purty do?" She looked him in the eye. That was all. Not a bad answer, really, but I thought that under the circumstances a few words of reason might be in order. I volunteered myself for the task, partly because I liked a woman with guts, partly because I respected the men in the Corps and felt their position could be expressed in a more thoughtful manner than Gunny Goforth was likely to manage. But mainly I spoke up because at some deep level I hate all rules, symbols, rituals, fighting words, gang colors, routines, decorations, medals, trophies, badges, and anything else that suggests one human being is to be taken more seriously than another in a given situation simply on the basis of plumage. Besides, I was making no headway with the damned 60 cal. I was sitting on the mess hall table and felt very much above it all as I said, "Private, a high and tight is not a fashion statement. You've got to earn it." That seemed like a nice icebreaker. She must have agreed because she spoke to me, not Goforth. "I'm as much a Marine as the next man," she said, glancing at me before returning her steady attention back to the Gunny. The first retort that crossed my mind was to take a big bite of the red apple that happened to be in my hand. The longer it took to chew and swallow that piece of apple, the more profound would be my clever rejoinder, it seemed to me. So I did, and Goforth took a step closer to Arlene, deliberately breaking her space. Arlene stood her ground, not budging an inch. In between bites of the apple, I thought I would essay another arbitration. "You know," I essayed, "a high and tight is not mil-spec for ladies. It's not regulation for men either," she shot back. There was no arguing with that, but there was plenty of apple left to crunch. Gunny Goforth didn't have an apple. "Any Marine who wears that'll do," he said. "Sure as hell is gonna earn it, Missy." I thought the Missy was a bit much. Arlene Sanders leaned forward into his space, close enough to either kiss him or bite off his round knob of a nose. Instead, she said 2 words. "You're on." Goforth was just as stubborn. He was native to Georgia, but might as well have been from Missouri when it came to matters of proof. "Every Marine is a rifleman first," he said. "If you want to spot that thing, Missy, then you'd best pick up your cute little buns and follow me to the rifle range." She gave him a curt nod. Challenge accepted. They started to leave. Then Goforth noticed my juicy, red apple, which had tasted much better than the discussion, as far as I was concerned. "Hey, Fly," he said. "How's about grabbing that sack of apples?" As I hoisted the apples and made tracks, I could honestly say that I didn't have a clue what old Goforth was up to. The range was a short walk. Every man who had been present for the exchange of words followed along. No one wanted to miss entertainment of this high a caliber. No pun intended. Goforth walked on over to Arlene and said, "Private, you need a whole helping of guts to where they do. Takes more'n just a steady rifle hand, that it do." At least he didn't call her Missy this time. Holding up his hand, palm toward me, he shouted, "Fly, toss me one of those apples. Y'all watch a history lesson." Now that I finally had the idea, I was none too happy, but Arlene just smiled, a little thin smile. I think she guessed what the gun was scheming. I slapped the apple into the gunny sergeant's paw. He casually tossed it and caught it a few times, then asked Arlene, "You like history, little lady?" He was laying the accent on so thick I could barely understand him. "Let me guess," she said with a thick grin. "You like William Tell." Goforth looked crestfallen that she had outguessed him, stealing some wind from his sails. But if verbal teasing wouldn't do the job, he was more than ready to push this thing on to the real thing. I could see it in his face. There was no humor left. When I had first joined Fox Company, Goforth went out of his way to make me feel welcome. About the worst he did was to tag me with the nickname Fly. He didn't bag on me the way he was doing to Arlene. He gestured to Dodd to bring over the artillery, and Dodd brought a .30 caliber bolt-action sniper rifle, top of the line. Goforth flashed Arlene a big, soapy grin, but she held her ground. Made me wonder, not just about the gun, but the other guys who leered and chuckled unpleasantly. Plenty of men are solid guys, decent fathers and husbands, but revert to wolfman when confronted by physical prowess in a woman. As Goforth lived up to his name and went forward with the William Tell bit, I was getting panicky. But I kept it to myself. She was going to play this one out to the bitter end. I figured that from the way she planted her feet, put her arms behind her, and said, "Go for it." Abruptly, everybody stopped laughing. Gunny Goforth noticed, but wasn't about to back down with 8. I'm sure it was. 8 guys watching. With an almost delicate concern, he carefully placed the apple on her head. Then he took the .30 caliber and slowly backed away from her. He aimed just as carefully and said, in a voice that had lost all sarcasm, "Last chance, honey." I thought honey sounded better than Missy. Arlene didn't move, but I could see that she was trembling ever so slightly beneath her bravado. I sure as hell didn't blame her. Goforth took a deep breath and said, "All right, darling. I suggest in the strongest terms that you don't flinch none." I was the one who jumped when he squeezed off a shot, and damned if the apple didn't split perfectly down the middle, each half falling on either side of her head. Everyone let out his breath and a ragged cheer erupted. "Way to go, Gunny," said one man. "Fox Company Ichiban," said another. We'd forgotten one item. We'd forgotten that Arlene had put her skull on the line. The drama wasn't over until she said it was. As Goforth basked in his moment of glory, the boys all praising him, Arlene walked toward him. Her hands were behind her back and she was smiling sweetly. I saw what she was carrying before the gun did. She held an apple up until he saw it. Then she tossed it to him. Silence again. Nobody moved. Then just as smoothly as you please, Arlene Sanders picked up the .30 caliber from the table, staring expectantly at Goforth and cocking one of her eyebrows. I never doubted what Goforth would do. His basic sense of fair play could be counted on, and he had guts. He wasn't about to lose his men's respect. Not Goforth. So, in the words of the old-time baseball player, It was deja vu all over again. He put the apple on his head, his icy eyes boring into Arlene's. She watched him just as intently. No lovers were ever more focused on one another. She cocked and raised the rifle, which wasn't even fitted with a scope, just iron sights. A few of the men backed farther away from the cone of fire surrounding the gunnery sergeant. That pissed me off, so I deliberately took a few steps closer to the duel. Something about this girl inspired confidence that she was no more likely to blow away a spectator than the gunnery sergeant. Goforth had his own concerns. "If you have to, miss," he said so softly that it didn't even sound like him, "please to make it high." He smiled with an effort. The request seemed reasonable enough. Arlene said nothing. She lifted the rifle nice and slow. She didn't make us wait. She pounded out a shot, and the apple was blown off Goforth's head. Corporal Stout ran over and picked it up. It was still mostly in one piece, but there was a gratifying furrow a little high off the center. After a long moment, during which no one said a word, Goforth walked up to Arlene Sanders. Putting hands on his hips, he made a big show of inspecting her high and tight, while we all held our breath. Goforth bent down, examined her right side, left side, back, front, then looked her evenly in the eye, winked, and nodded. "It's you, Private," he said, and I was pretty damned sure he wouldn't be calling her Missy again. She didn't miss, you see. Some of the boys took to calling her Will, though.